Hang on to your seat cheeks. It's the Michael Welch Podcast. Buffaloes, Hurricanes, and Longhorns coming out big this past weekend. Let's walk through the new AP Top 25, recap some of the games, and put together your new watch guide for this upcoming week.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings.
I need my blessings every penny, daily counting every single one, I'm seeing plenty. Level up.
All right, so I thought it'd be fun to jog through the AP Top 25 this week. I basically skipped on that after week one because there wasn't enough movement. But we've got a little bit of shifting in and out in a couple of chunks here. Let's see, 12 through 16 didn't move much, and a couple spots in the top 10 didn't do a whole lot of moving. But we'll kind of walk through the games in that range there. So number 1 is Georgia, number 2 is Michigan, number 3 is Florida State, and number 4 is Texas. Those would be your playoff teams, presumably, if it was to start today. Georgia didn't do a whole lot this weekend, smashing up Ball State 45-3, and Michigan whooped on UNLV 35-7. Carson Beck, again, having another chance under center for the Georgia Bulldogs, whose defense does not look quite as intimidating. 1 sack on the year, not quite as good at generating pressure there, but still shutting down opposing offenses. Of course, they haven't played a lot of quality opponents there. And Michigan, same thing. And J.J. McCarthy, 278 yards, couple touchdowns. Beck had comparable numbers there. And the ground game going a little bit better. Quorum had 3 touchdowns rushing with 80 yards there. But again, they didn't put up exactly a show on the ground. 179 total yards after sack yardage and everything taken out. But they didn't exactly roll out the red carpet there for their running backs again. Florida State got a bit of a breather this week by crushing Southern Miss 66-13. They rolled up the rushing yardage. 306 on the ground there. 4 rushing touchdowns, 3 for Trey Benson, the new running back there in the backfield at the starting position. And Alabama got smushed at home in Tuscaloosa by Texas, 34-24. I believe it was let's run the numbers here, the first double-digit loss that they've had since 2009, I believe it was. Only the 10th loss that Alabama has had at home under Nick Saban in his about 15-year career there. And I think only the second non-conference loss that he's suffered at home. The first one being Louisiana Monroe back in 2007. I take that back. Texas A&M in 2012 wasn't part of the SEC yet, so technically that is a non-conference loss as well. So it would be his third, but only second by current members. It's still just a crazy statistic and not something that Alabama people are used to seeing there. Quinn Ewers did a great job through a couple deep balls. Still have to remember, he's still only got like 15 starts under his belt that really matter after he was injured last year, his first full year as a starter. So yeah, 15's right about that number now. 349 yards passing and 3 touchdowns. He was hitting the deep balls. He looked really good doing it. His tight end Sanders had 5 catches for 114 yards. Adonai Mitchell had 3 for 78 and 2 touchdowns, and the big man Xavier Worthy had 5 for 75 yards and a touchdown. They're averaging over 9 yards per catch, which was pretty solid, and just a great job by that passing attack. The defensive line was getting in on what was supposed to be advantageous for Alabama, and that was their offensive line. 5 sacks, 9 tackles for losses there, getting after Jalen Monroe, who really kind of struggled there. Now, his passing numbers, 14 for 27 for 255, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He had a couple big passing plays there. Let's see, the long ones here, 49 yards, 39 yards, 28 yards, 37, 27. So he had a handful of really big yardage plays, but really suffered otherwise than a handful of big shot plays. And he's 44 yards scrambling as well. And it was noted on the broadcast there that he just wasn't making reads at times. The pressure was getting after him so often. He was just scrambling out of the pocket and trying to pick up yards with his legs, and it was just not super successful. Perhaps they should have ran a few more plays for him, work on some option stuff, just moved more to his strengths. I was also texting a buddy of mine, wondering if they were going to switch quarterbacks at the half when they were down 13-6, and the offense just looked absolutely atrocious. And I think it's concerning that they didn't, and really didn't switch up the game plan much at all. It really didn't feel like Alabama was going to get back into this at any point. 3 for 18 on third downs is what Texas was, and Alabama was 5 for 14. They had almost 100 fewer yards of offense. The Crimson Tide did 2 turnovers to none, 10 penalties. Another killer, of course, in the Saban era. Most penalties in a game last year. I believe that was the LSU loss, if I'm not mistaken. One of the couple losses there. It wasn't Texas A&M, so it must have been the LSU game. But most penalties in the Nick Saban era came just last season, and 10 for 90 yards is pretty dang close to that. Alabama only had 18 rushing attempts as well, if you take Jalen Monroe's scrambles out of there, and those weren't great either. Jace McClellan was averaging 3.8 per carry, and some of the other backs were much less than that got touches. Just horrible, really horrible offensive production, not playing to the quarterback's strengths for the guy that you decided to go with. Alabama's defense also seemed to struggle. Texas had 11 full possessions and had 2 3-and-outs, and also scored on a 1-play drive and a 3-play drive. So just as many 3-and-outs as they had 3-play or less scoring drives. They also missed a field goal as well, so they would have scored on over 50% of their possessions if they hadn't missed that field goal. So they just didn't look sharp in a lot of different ways, despite having a lot of the great talent. Now, Texas, talent-wise, should be comparable to Alabama. Comparable. Not quite the same level, but a lot better coached right now, and they have a quarterback. And they just went to Tuscaloosa and beat the hell out of Alabama. I was shocked at the way it happened. Milroe was such a nothing, such a zero, and they had no way to kind of get him into more effective plays and away from what he couldn't do, and then they didn't put another quarterback in there. That was shameful. They didn't go to running the ball a little bit more. It was never completely out of control. It was never a 3-score game or a 20-point game or a 17-point game. They had an opportunity to kind of hang in there up until, things got out of control in the fourth quarter. And it just, you never thought like Texas was really going to lose control of it. So it was absolutely stunning final result to that game. And probably the biggest win of the year so far, other than Florida State's win over LSU. I would say that isn't quite as big. However, Florida State currently sits in the 3 spot, and that moves Texas all the way up to the 4 hole and moves Alabama down to the 10 spot. So rounding out the rest of the top 10 is number 5 USC, 6 Ohio State, 7 Penn State, 8 Washington, 9 Notre Dame. Penn State and Washington haven't moved since last week, but USC torches another team here. Stanford, its first win in conference play against the Cardinals. It was 49-3 at the half. Williams put in his time and then happily headed to the bench to take a little breather. 3 touchdowns passing, another one on the ground, 300 yards of total offense. Miller Moss got extended time at the backup quarterback position, 11 for 15 passing there. Ashton Daniels, the quarterback for the Cardinals, who looked like he might be a decent player for them this year, did get sacked in the second quarter and went down hurt. Hopefully he'll be back this upcoming week. Didn't look good against USC prior to that, but the Trojans march on with no problems there. Ohio State kept in Kyle McCord at quarterback and rolled Youngstown State 35-7, 14 for 20, 3 touchdowns from McCord. Devin Brown, who's possibly inching in for playing time or a backup spot or a starter spot, was 7 for 13 passing, 123 yards on the ground. I mean, Youngstown State's a decent FBS level squad, but just not super great for Ohio State. They kind of tucked it in at halftime as well. Marvin Harrison Jr., 7 catches for 160 and 2 touchdowns, but not a lot to see there from Ohio State, of course. Penn State. Drew Aller still looks good, 22 for 26, 204, and a touchdown. Running backs look good. Katron Allen, 19 carries, 103 yards, and a touchdown. Singleton, 12 carries for 47 yards, and 3 touchdowns. 315 yards and 6 touchdowns on the ground for Penn State as they ground Delaware into the dirt 63-7 behind Michigan, who hasn't played anyone either. Penn State's probably the second best looking team in the Big Ten right now. Washington crushes Tulsa 43-10. 3 touchdowns for Penix Jr., 28 for 38 for 409. 109 yards on the ground, 3 touchdowns there. Couple turnovers and a few too many penalties that then you'd like to see for a team that could be possibly winning the Pac-12 and have a shot at the playoffs. They don't look worse than anyone else out there, and they'll get Michigan State this upcoming week. Now, Notre Dame smashed NC State 45-24, the Wolfpack. This went to the fourth quarter until Notre Dame was able to pull away. We know the Wolfpack has a good defensive unit, but again, this offense for the past couple years has really gone in a hole and died. Brennan Armstrong for the Wolfpack had 3 interceptions in this game, 22 for 47 passing. Not super efficient. He had 2 touchdowns passing and 1 on the ground. And, man, the Wolfpack, it's very disappointing. They got 4 sacks, 5 tackles for loss. Sam Hartman still managed to put up 4 touchdowns in the air, and the Irish rolled up 456 in total offense, but they did struggle a little bit in this game. 5 for 14 on third down. They did hold NC State to 8 for 19 on third down. Of course, first forced those turnovers there. Also had 10 penalties for 82 yards, while NC State had 8 for 52. Just a sloppy-ish game. But again, NC State, good defensively, held down what looked like a very potent Notre Dame offensive team and just can't get there. Just can't score the freaking points to stay in the hunt there. So they're now 1-1. Notre Dame now 3-0. Seems to have real weapons there. Holden Stays had 4 catches for 115 yards and 2 touchdowns. Looks like a great player there. Esme, 14 carries for 132 and 2 touchdowns. And Notre Dame can really move the ball. And that was their first test, one of the better defenses in the college football landscape, as they say right now. And first real challenge, and they win a big one on the road. So your top 10, Georgia, Michigan, Florida State, Texas, USC, Ohio State, Penn State, Washington, Notre Dame, and Alabama. Now your next group here. So you have Tennessee, Utah, Oregon, and LSU is your next kind of set here. Your next 4. Tennessee struggled a bit, but eventually pulled away from Austin Peay 30-13. Joe Milton able to do a bit of damage here in the end, although this team's really relying on the run game. Wright at running back was able to put up 118 yards as they eventually pulled away from Austin Peay. So watch out for that. They got Florida coming next week. That could be a very gritty defensive game that doesn't so much rely on the quarterback position. And Utah, oh my goodness. Let's talk about Utah for a second. 20-13 on the road against Baylor. In a struggle there, they were down late in this game. They scored 2 touchdowns in the final few minutes. They had to go back to their 4th string quarterback yet again, who was actually listed as a running back on the squad. Bison Barnes, nope, that was the 3rd stringer. Nate Johnson was the 4th stringer. Converted running back, and he came in to take snaps. Hasn't been super good for them. Did have to play a little bit last game, and he's just more efficient when he runs the ball. That's when Utah started to get some movement in the last couple drives. Last 3 drives, I believe he came in. Able to score a touchdown with about just over a minute remaining. And then Baylor, Sawyer Robinson was the backup quarterback in there. after they had their own problems with Sharpen getting hurt last week. He threw a pick, immediately set up Utah in good position for a possible field goal, but they were able to go ahead and score a touchdown. Now Baylor got the ball back, set up a big play, got it down to the 20, had one last play with the second left, and it was batted down. The pass was batted down in the end zone. So we could have had some real craziness and overtime in this after a Baylor touchdown lead. You could have been looking up at the 2-minute mark where it was 13-6, and then all of a sudden it's 20-20 going into overtime. So that's the kind of wild ending that we had there. Don't know when Cam Rising's coming back yet. Bryson Barnes, not great at quarterback. He was 6 for 19, had a pick. Again, survived Florida last week, really beat them down with that defense and that first play from the line of scrimmage going 70 yards for a touchdown. But Nate Johnson just looks better running the football and throwing it every once in a while. That's the guy who should be under center until Cam Rising returns there. Oregon at 13 gives the Pac-12 4 teams in the top 13, which is more than any other conference, and they sure look like the best at the moment. They survived the Red Raiders of Texas Tech 38-30 on the road, and it took a lot because Texas Tech had a lead, just like they had a lead last week against Wyoming, 17-point lead, and they ended up losing it. Texas Tech did the same thing again here. Oregon had to score 20 points in the fourth quarter in order to pull away. 20 points. They were down 27-18 entering the fourth quarter, and then the wheels came off for Texas Tech. Now, Oregon had 14 penalties for 124 yards. That was one of the big problems. 3.6 yards per carry, all bad there. However, 472 yards of offense, 10 for 18 on third down was certainly awesome. Texas Tech, efficient on third down as well, 7 for 12, and was comparable in yardage. 4 turnovers, though. 4 turnovers. Absolutely back-breaking there. Shuck, I always say that name. Tyler Shuck, I believe it is. We'll go with Shuck. Tyler Shuck, the former Oregon Duck, playing quarterback for Texas Tech, 24 for 38. 3 touchdowns, 3 picks, also 101 yards on the ground and a touchdown, but just too many mistakes for that ball club. Not able to put a ton of pressure on Oregon. They just couldn't get things going early. Bo Nix was 32 for 44, for 359, and 2 touchdowns. The run game was held to 113 yards. That was one of the problems, is that defensive front for Texas Tech. And 4 sacks as well for the Oregon Ducks. Just took them a while to get going there and put the Red Raiders away. I still think Oregon could win the Pac-12 as well. I know I picked Washington in the preseason, and I still stick with them. Oregon, I think, should be right behind there, and especially with Utah's quarterback problems right now, and not sure if USC's defense, which is coming around, is quite going to be able to handle Oregon and Washington, and I think their offenses might be able to keep close enough pace with Caleb Williams. Rounding out the top 15 are LSU and Kansas. LSU went to Grambling with a hammer, 72-10. Jaden Daniels actually had 5 passing touchdowns in this one, which was a really big deal there. So the offense had a very happy time putting it to Grambling after the loss to Florida State. And Kansas State looked really good smashing Troy. They were not favored by 20-plus points in a 42-13 beatdown. Will Howard looked really good, passed for 250 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also Scooby-Dooed and scrambled a little bit, 33 yards and 2 touchdowns. Looks like they'll be able to run the ball a little bit. J.D. Giddens and Treshaun Ward both able to put up 50-plus yards on the ground, although they don't have a true replacement, I don't think, yet for Deuce Vaughn. I haven't watched quite enough of their games yet, but it doesn't seem like they really have that. The defense looked all right. 4 sacks, 9 tackles for loss. Looks like they'll be able to do some damage. They might still be in the Big 12 there. And let's run through the rest of the top, at least 20 at least, before we enter some new rankings in the bottom half here. 16, Oregon State, 17, Ole Miss, 18, Colorado, of course, 19, Oregon, and 20, North Carolina. So Oregon State smashed UC Davis 55-7. We still don't have a barometer on them after beating San Jose State in the opener. DJ Uiagalelei, more modest, 107 yards passing, couple touchdowns, did some damage to a good lower level school, ran for 269 yards as a team, and did some damage on defense. 12 tackles for losses to go with 3 sacks. Kind of crazy there. Ole Miss played one of the top games of the day. They were ranked 20th at the time, playing at number 24 Tulane. They won 37-20. They scored 20 points in the fourth quarter there. Jackson Dart is looking pretty solid, really, considering there's been a lot of discussion about the quality of quarterback play in the SEC. But really, we knew coming into this conference, if you looked around, that the Pac-12 and really the ACC, although that's quickly a theory falling apart, were the more quality quarterbacks there. But Jackson Dart, a couple touchdowns in the air, 267 yards passing, 41 rushing. Judkins was not good in this game. 18 carries for 48 yards and a touchdown, 2.7 a carry. Really fortunate, kind of to win this one. Michael Pratt, starting quarterback, was out for Tulane, so the backup was in, and he was 15 for 37 passing. And just really rough for Tulane, who still sacked the quarterback. 4 sacks apiece in this game. But Tulane could have won this one. 9 for 22 on third down. Ole Miss was 1 for 13. And it was just a very, very tough game that Ole Miss was able to win on the road. The Rebels scored on 4 of their last 5 possessions. Tulane had a fumble returned for a touchdown. They had a couple turnover on downs, which was not helpful. And it was just difficult for them to kind of pull away after they had a nice lead there. And it could have made a difference if their star quarterback was in the game. But it was a great win for Ole Miss, who might have something to say in the SEC West Division there, with Alabama and LSU. It could be very much in the mix. Texas A&M having some problems. We'll get to them in a minute. Next up, Colorado, moving up 4 slots, just flying up here. Shedeur Sanders is flying up draft boards as maybe the 3rd best quarterback in the draft behind Caleb Williams and Drake May. 31 for 42 for almost 400 yards and a couple of touchdowns. Now this game was 0-0 with just a few minutes to go before half. And Colorado really took advantage. They finally able to get a field goal on the board here. Then they were able to get 13 points on the board before halftime, just like that. And then they just exploded in the second half. But Nebraska's first half drives went fumble, punt, missed field goal, fumble, interception, punt. That's how terrible it was. Now Colorado was able to finally get a field goal on the board with 1:12 to go. Then off the Nebraska interception that followed off of 3 plays for -2 yards, they hit a 1 play in 8 seconds from 30 yards out for a touchdown. Nebraska then spent a little over a minute, close to 2 minutes, before they punted it back to Colorado, who was able to set up a field goal in 49 seconds to finally push it to a 13-0 halftime lead when it was 0-0 with 5:33 to go before the half. And Nebraska was in it despite all the problems they were having, playing pretty good defense and just forcing Colorado to punt the football. In the second half, just completely got out of hand, and the passing game is great. They cannot run the ball very effectively. They did put up, 58 yards on the ground. That takes sack yardage out of it, though. Altogether, they were able to put over 80 yards on the ground, but it wasn't terribly effective. Dylan Edwards, 9 carries for 55 yards, 6.1 per carry, but that's just not the game. It's Shedeur Sanders throwing the football. Xavier Weaver at 10 catches for 170 yards and a touchdown. He was the leading receiver. Travis Hunter, 3 catches for 73 yards. He also had 4 tackles and a pass defended. He played up both ways again. A lot of snaps for that guy. Oklahoma beat SMU 28-17. to 11. Dylan Gabriel had 4 touchdowns, only 176 yards though, 19 for 27 passing. Not super effective offensively. I didn't get a chance to watch a lot of this game, but there's a lot of talk that Jackson Arnold, who only got in for a few carries, 4 carries for 11 yards in this game, the young man backing him up, I believe he's a true freshman. Yeah. But there's a lot of expectations for him to take the reins from Dylan Gabriel at some point at the starting quarterback position. SMU was not a bad team at any stretch, but they had a hard time really converting third downs. They had 367 yards of offense, which is a couple more than the Sooners, but they also had a couple turnovers, and it was just very difficult for them to get going. Not a lot. 3.4 per rush, 5.6 per pass, just not super efficient there. And Oklahoma was able to be more efficient and not turn the ball over and just won the ball game there. It's fairly simple. I didn't get to watch a whole lot of it, but excited to see what happens with the quarterback position, and Red River rivalry starting to come up pretty soon here. Now, ACC's interesting. Florida State's way up there at number 3 right now, and the next team on the poll is way down at 20, 21, and 22. North Carolina, Duke, and Miami are waiting to see how the ACC shakes out. North Carolina beat Appalachian State 40-34. North Carolina had to make a big 4th down stop in overtime to win this one. I believe it was it double overtime? Double overtime. Yep, because we had not a lot of trouble scoring in this one initially. We thought that defensive front would be much better for North Carolina. And Appalachian State was still able to do some things. 0 sacks in this game for North Carolina. 4 tackles for losses. Drake May didn't throw a single touchdown pass. He ran for one. 260-something yards total offense for him. Omarion Hampton, 234 yards rushing on 26 carries. That still comes out to 9 yards a tote and 3 touchdowns for that young guy. Holy Moses. They may have a real running back there again, as I said last week. A real running back there, so that's something. A little defense, some running backs, some talent there in North Carolina, Chapel Hill. App State still put up 494 yards of total offense. They were 8 for 17 on 3rd down, 2 for 3 on 4th down. They walked a touchdown in overtime, and North Carolina's defense has still got some strides to make. And Drake May not being able to get the ball in the end zone or be quite as effective is a little bit concerning. But again, we had these problems last year with him, and they still managed to make the ACC title game. They got Minnesota this week. Much better, a defense. So we'll see. Again, the conference slate didn't look challenging to begin the season. Now they have Miami coming up in a few weeks. Duke and Clemson and North Carolina on the back end. But, we'll see. They got some things to figure out. Duke now. Duke beat Lafayette 42-7. Didn't learn a whole lot there. Offense still didn't look real awesome, just as it didn't against Clemson, even though they won that football game. Leonard was 12 for 12 for 136 and a touchdown before he hit the bench. The backups got in, but just not a whole lot learned for about Duke against Lafayette. The Lafayette Leopards. I guess I didn't know that mascot, but there we go. Miami played another one of the biggest games of the day in a slate full of them, and that was, of course, against Texas A&M Aggies. Both of these squads, no, Texas A&M was ranked coming in, and Miami was not, but Miami was certainly hosting, and they were not good hosts. 48-33 as they beat the brakes off Texas A&M. Van Dyke, 5 passing touchdowns. I don't think a Miami player had ever passed for 5 touchdowns against a ranked opponent was the stat that ESPN put up. 374 total passing yards, 21 for 30, and just a great day for him. Not a whole lot going on the ground, far less than 100 yards. Jacoby George had 3 touchdowns and 94 yards on 5 catches. Xavier Respro had 6 catches for 126. The defense had 0 sacks, had a handful of tackles for loss. Texas A&M, it was supposed to have the best talent among the handful of most talented teams in the country, according to recruiting ratings, which are actually pretty accurate nowadays. And they just don't seem to know what the hell they're doing. They should have been favorites, I think, in this ball game and had a real opportunity to win. Connor Wingman was 31 for 53 for 336, 2 touchdowns and 2 picks, less than 100 yards rushing. Evan Stewart had 11 catches for 146, and not a whole lot exciting out of the receiving core otherwise. The defense had a couple sacks, but the defensive front is supposed to be really great for this team, and just didn't do a whole lot. And Miami just pounded them threw over their heads, I should say, and beat the hell out of them. 12.5 yards per passing attempt. Miami had 10 penalties for 115 yards and still won. 12.5 yards per passing attempt. But Texas A&M had 7 themselves, 3 turnovers, faced way too many third downs, 18 of them. They were 8 for 18, but that's still a lot of third downs. Yeah, I just don't know what they're doing with the talent there, but that sentiment is shared by everyone who knows the kind of recruits they've been getting in there. And of course, the results on the field to follow. Huge win for Miami. They're now 2-0. The schedule is one of the more difficult in the ACC, but maybe Tyler Van Dyke has played himself into one of the better QBs in the conference, maybe back onto the NFL radar. They do have to play home against Clemson and road games against North Carolina, North Carolina State, and Florida State. That's tough, but they have a couple easy ones coming up here before they will presumably be challenged again if they've really changed their ways since they were losing to Middle Tennessee last year. And it seems like they have. To round out the top 25, now Miami wasn't ranked last week. Number 23, Washington State wasn't ranked last week. Number 24, UCLA wasn't ranked last week. And number 25, Iowa was ranked in the first preseason poll, fell out, and they're back in. Washington State was able to beat Wisconsin 31-22. Beat them in both games. The home and home beat them last year. And Cameron Ward, 21 for 33, 208, 2 touchdowns. Not great there. 43 yards on the ground. The defense, 3 sacks, a few tackles for loss, knocked some balls down. Tanner Mordecai was 25 for 40 passing for the Badgers for 277 and a touchdown. The ground game was completely shut down, which is hugely troublesome. Brandon Allen had 7 carries for 20 yards. I don't know why he wasn't given more. Less than 3 yards a carry, but still. Milusa, the other back there, 12 carries for 50 yards and a touchdown. That was 4.2 per carry. I don't know what the deal was there. It wasn't a bludgeoning by any imagination. They were down 24-9 at halftime, but I don't know why they didn't go back to running the ball. They did get it close again before the fourth quarter, but I don't quite understand what's going on there. I may need to watch a little bit more than the pieces I caught of their first 2 games so far. But Wisconsin looks not great. Not so great. More yardage than Washington State. Fewer penalties, but 3 turnovers. And just the offense doesn't look so great. Washington State now has wins over Wisconsin and Colorado State, which isn't much to shake a stick at. But they do increase the number of teams in the top 25 from the Pac-12, along with UCLA, who beat Coastal Carolina when switching to Dante Moore last week, and won again this past week by beating up on another team that had no shot, really, in the San Diego State Aztecs. 35-10 was the final. Dante Moore had 290 yards and 3 touchdowns. Pretty good day, all things considered. He was 17 for 27, which isn't awesome, but slowly bringing him along. 254 yards on the ground and a couple touchdowns. Kirsten Steele had a good day. TJ Hayden had a really good day. The defense had 10 tackles for losses along with 3 sacks. And let's face it, San Diego State, once you put about 20 points on the board, you about have it wrapped up. 3 picks for Jalen Maiden, the quarterback there. And this is just not a very good football team. And they'll probably be in the race for the Mountain West Conference title, but they're just not very good. So the Pac-12 now, with the full top 25, has USC at the 5 spot, Washington at 8, Utah at 12, Oregon at 13, Oregon State at 16. I almost counted Colorado in there. Washington State at 23 and UCLA at 24 has 7 teams in the top 24, technically. And finally, Iowa manages to creep back in there. They put a whooping on a not very promising team there in Iowa State. Great defensively again, but the offense is going to continue to struggle. And again, they didn't hit the 25-point mark, which is necessary to average throughout the year in order for the offensive coordinator there, Ferns' son, to keep his job. But they did not hit that number again, so they'll have to make that up somewhere. 20-13 was the final, in a kind of an unexciting game there. But Iowa might be the best team now in that division. With Nebraska 0-2 and looking pretty pathetic. Illinois looks pretty pathetic. They were absolutely blown up by Kansas on Friday night, I believe it was. Minnesota doesn't look too intimidating. And Wisconsin still clearly got some growth to experience there. Purdue did manage to win, by the way, over Virginia Tech 24-17. So they have their first win of the year. They're 1-1. But maybe Iowa is the favorite in that division right now. Now, Clemson fell out of the top 25. Arkansas is out. TCU still out. Kansas is out, but won a big game, like I said, over Illinois. It wasn't even close on Friday night. They absolutely beat the tar out of them, 34-23, and it wasn't even that close. Jalen Daniels came back into that game, the other Jalen Daniels, and he was a big upgrade over Jason Bean. I wasn't sure if it'd be that comparable, but he absolutely moved in the pocket. Only 24 yards on the ground, but really able to make a difference there. Devin Neal, 10 carries, 120 yards. And Daniel Hinshaw Jr., 12 carries for 92 yards. A touchdown apiece. 21 for 29 passing, 2 touchdowns, 277. Just beat the hell out of Luke Altmaier. Almost knocked him out of the game at one point. Altmaier, to his credit, had 70 yards on the ground and 2 touchdowns. 202 passing, a touchdown and 2 picks. But Illinois looks bad right now. They don't look so great. Kansas had 6 sacks, 9 tackles for losses for defense. That's looked awful for as long as you can remember, back to like the 2012 season, I believe it was, where they were really good. And that just seemed like an anomaly, but of a game. But maybe Kansas can beat some teams in the Big 12. It's very exciting. It was very exciting to watch in their all black uniforms with the Jayhawk on the side of the helmet. But Tulane's also out. Wisconsin's out. And then Mississippi State and Kentucky are also sitting on the doorstep there. But some of these teams should obviously start to pop back in. It's going to be very difficult for Arkansas and their division, TCU, if they can't start to get things around there. Clemson this past week, they did win. They beat up on Charleston Southern 66-17. Took them a minute to get going too. It was 14-14 after the first quarter, and they were trailing for a good chunk of that. Then it was 24-17 at the half, and they blew them out after that. Klubnik got going with 4 touchdowns and 315 yards passing. Didn't watch a whole lot of that one, but he finally got his act together a little bit there. Arkansas, I haven't got to watch a whole lot of Arkansas ball. I thought they were going to struggle a bit this season, and so far, not too off. They beat Kent State 28-6. Had to score a touchdown each quarter to get there, though. Did not look good at all. Not sure what's going on with the Razorbacks, but again, playing against Alabama and LSU and Texas A&M still to come. And they have the starting quarterback. KJ Jefferson was 13 for 19. Couple touchdowns, 136 yards, 48 on the ground. Not good. 7 sacks. That's something, I guess, but 11 tackles for losses against the worst team at Division I. But man, just struggle city there. Devin O'Leary, who struggled in the NC State offense last year, transferred to Kentucky, where I hope he'd had more success. And he had 4 touchdowns last weekend for 299 yards. But 28 points is where it stopped, and a 28-17 win over Eastern Kentucky, where they trailed 7-0 after the first quarter and tied 7-7 at the first half. Not great ball there at the moment. Tough for South Carolina still. They beat up on Furman 47-21. That is too many points to give up to Furman. Mississippi State had a tough loss in overtime to Arizona. Or no, they beat Arizona. Sorry, Arizona had a tough loss to Mississippi State. 31-24 is the final there for the Wildcats. Jaden DeLora had 342 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. His top man, McMillan there, his top receiver there, 8 catches for 161 yards and a touchdown, though. Very senior heavy again is Mississippi State. They run the ball with this new system here, which does not seem really indicative of the personnel that's been recruited by Mike Leach previously. 13 for 17 was Will Rogers for 162 yards and 3 touchdowns. 37 carries by running backs. Or maybe it was 35 after sack yardage and such, but still, that's just wild and uncharacteristic, and they only managed to squeeze by Arizona there just barely in overtime, and they'll be able to exploit LSU this upcoming week, just like they would have had an opportunity to exploit Arizona. We'll see if they go more to the air and Will Rogers and some of those receivers. Now, Auburn beat Cal late, 14-10. Cal had a horrible injury to the quarterback, I believe. Ben Finley went down, which probably didn't help anything. And they just struggled a little bit after that. But back and forth, Peyton Thorne was 9 for 14 for 2 touchdowns and a pick. For Auburn, it looks like they're going to be running the football more this year, a whole lot more. And Cal will continue to throw the ball. Both defenses looked okay. I watched bits and pieces of this one. But man, the offenses are just not very good at passing the football. 7 total turnovers in this game. Competitive, yes. Good football, no, it was not. Phil Jurkic, who was supposed to be a really good quarterback last year for Boston College. He spent several seasons at Boston College. Really struggled behind a bad offensive line last season. He transferred over to Pitt as we play the musical quarterback transfer game here. 10 for 32 passing, but had 3 touchdowns against Cincinnati with the Pittsburgh Panthers and lost 27-21. So tough beat there for Pitt as he continues his quarterback struggles at a different school. And speaking of quarterback struggles, Emory Jones, who was at his 3rd school in 3 years after leaving Florida and then Arizona State, starting quarterback now for Cincinnati. He was 18 for 28 for 125, 2 touchdowns and a pick, and almost over 200 yards of rushing yardage for Cincinnati, and they were able to put Pitt away. I didn't get to see a lot of either of these teams, but Cincinnati, offensively and defensively, looked better than Pitt, who had to put 2 touchdowns on the board late to make this a ball game at all. James Madison was favored to win at Virginia. They were up 17-7 after the first quarter, fell behind in the third, and then won it 36-35 by putting up 12 points in the fourth quarter. So good job for the Dukes there, and the Cavaliers fall to 0-2. So it's tough looks for that squad. Rice surprised Houston and beat them in double overtime. Jaden Daniels, former Power 5 guy, going to a much lower level school. He's been at USC, he's been at Georgia, he's been at West Virginia, he's at his 4th school, all the way at Wee Widow Weiss, 43-41 in overtime on a crazy grab, over 400 yards, 3 touchdowns, and they take down the Houston Cougars. Not a lot of notes on this game. Donovan Smith is the quarterback for Houston. He was at Texas Tech last year as the backup, forced into a starting role for several games when Shuck was out. He's an inconsistent. That's all there is really to say about that. But Rice did a very good job. Pretty good job defensively. They're not a Power 5 team, but they have a Power 5 quarterback. TCU wins 41-6 over Nicholas State to pick up its first victory. Chandler Morris was okay. Oklahoma State beat Arizona State 27-15 on the late night slate. Rashada's not looking good so far, but still hope on Arizona State. He's going to be my little fun pet project to watch and hope develop. Neither of these teams are very good, quite frankly. UCF beat Boise State 18-16 in a rather unexciting field goal bash. Boise State, man. Taylor Green was 9 for 19 for 144, a touchdown and a pick. I'm not sure if he went down injured in this one because Madison did come in and get several passing attempts as well. He threw one, got sacked a few times, and this was not good for Boise State. Alshon Jonty had 24 carries for 115. The defense wasn't super great, but, neither team scored. Plumlee for the Knights had 16 for 24 passing and 2 picks. He's a runner as well, 73 yards. No, they just benched Green. That's great. So Boise State's really struggling. They're 0-2. UCF is 2-1 and in the Big 12 now. Don't forget that. So just a rough game there. Glad I didn't watch a second of that one. And that's about it, other than Eastern Michigan covering the 20-point spread against Minnesota in a 25-6 loss that definitely helps signify that the Gophers are not going to be a good football team this year. Athen, I can't pronounce his last name, was 10 for 15 passing, 117 yards and a touchdown. They relied on the ground game and over 200 yards there, close to 300 yards. But the passing game's non-existent, and the defense did what it needed to do against a non-Power 5 team. Eastern Michigan, though, able to cover that spread, baby. Let's go, Eagles. They'll be a decent team in the MAC again, at least make a bowl game, of which there's only a handful, I think, in school history. So props to that. But that is your brief review of week number 2 in the college football world. All right, the slate is super light this week. 0 top 25 teams are playing each other. There's really no marquee matchup. Just not a lot going on at all. So starting with this Thursday, the 14th, it's probably the time I'll have this episode up, quite frankly. But Miami, who's currently ranked 22nd, will be hosting Bethune-Cookman on the ACC network. So you'll get a chance to see them rip that squad to shreds after the big win over Texas A&M. So get a shot at that. Tickets as low as $2 right now, I see. It's probably up in the nosebleed somewhere. Then you'll get to see Memphis at the same time slot on ESPN. They're hosting Navy. They're favored by a couple scores there. I've not got to witness 1 second of the Memphis Tigers yet this year. They should have a shot at winning the American Conference, though. Looks like SMU might be in the mix. I don't know how far Rice is going to get with JT Daniels. I imagine not too far. UTSA's been struggling a bit. Frank Harris is banged up. And, of course, Tulane's going to be in the mix there. They did a lot of damage to Bethune-Cookman themselves. They crushed Arkansas State last week. They have a quarterback that's pretty decent there in Seth Hangman. He's completing almost 74% of his passes. They're protecting him pretty well. So if you're like me, you'll be keeping an eye on that game opposite the Eagles-Vikings game on Thursday night. Friday brings us a triplet. Maryland is 2-0. They'll be hosting Virginia. And man, did the Terrapins really struggle in fending off Charlotte, I believe it was last week. Yeah, 38-20, they eventually beat off the Charlotte 49ers, I believe it was there. They were down 14-0 early. Tulia had 2 picks, had a touchdown as well, 287 yards. Not a great showing for the Maryland Terrapins, but they'll get a chance to punch out the Virginia Cavaliers, who will be a punching bag this year, something they're familiar with. They'll be on FS1 at 7 o'clock. Also at 7, UTSA, the Roadrunners I just spoke of, will be taking on Army. And Frank Harris was banged up last week. He'll be trying to recover here. against Army. The backup quarterback, Eddie Lee Marburger, will be checking in. He didn't complete any passes last week against Texas State, who they survived. They lost to Houston the week before that. So they're sitting at 1-1, and it's just a team that was supposed to be really good this season. It'll be unfortunate if injury and just some poor play really derailed it for them, because I like the Roadrunners. 8 o'clock, CBS Sports Network. Air Force, they're 2-0. They'll be hosting Utah State in a Mountain West battle. Air Force about 10-point favorites there at home. Utah State has put some points up on some not as comparable teams the last couple weeks, but Air Force will be heavy favorites on Friday night. Moving into Saturday, the noon slate. Only 12 games on, only 4 top 25 teams in that slate. Your top watches on Fox. Illinois at 1-1 will be hosting Penn State, 7th-ranked team, 2-0. And the Nittany Lions, again, probably only going to have real competition this year when they play Michigan or Ohio State. The biggest problem here is that Illinois was shellacked by Kansas last week. Looked really bad. Luke Altmaier was a little banged up, but stayed in the game. The offensive line really struggled to protect him. They, at times, most of the game, couldn't move the ball down the field. I don't know what they're going to do. Penn State crushed Delaware last week, beat West Virginia in the opener, and continues to look pretty solid and has a real quarterback in Drew Aller. I don't see a whole lot of problems here for Penn State. They're 2 touchdown favorites, and that's what we're looking at as far as top watch games. LSU and at Mississippi State is also on this rung, and LSU's favored by 9.5 right now at Mississippi State. Now, the big problem here is that Will Rogers, leading the senior-heavy team here for Mississippi State, they've reverted to running the football here. New coaching staff, new scheme, and that's been really painful. Perhaps if they'd thrown on Arizona's awful secondary last week, they wouldn't have needed overtime despite forcing 4 turnovers in order to pull out a win to move to 2-0. But that's something that they'll have to evaluate, breaking out of their 2 games into this new system mold to revert back to throwing the football on those susceptible defensive backs, those transfers at LSU that really cost them against Florida State. And it's not really known if that's going to happen. This was almost my top watch of the weekend. Mississippi State possibly pulling an upset and moving LSU to 1-2. But I'm just not sure that Mississippi State is going to appropriately break mold and try to throw on this LSU team. Jade Daniels had 5 touchdowns last week throwing. The defensive line is still very good, although Mississippi State could probably mitigate the damage a little bit, as you do need things to go right. A lot of things to go right to pull an upset, and it would start with the offensive scheme. And I just don't know for sure that that's going to happen here. But that is one of my top watches. And I do have 3 in this window. Missouri's hosting Kansas State. Both teams are 2-0. Kansas State's looked pretty good so far. Will Howard's looking good at quarterback. The run game is fine. Not sure there's a star there or at the receiver position per se, but they seem to have a good quarterback. Defense is doing all right. First challenge for either team, really. I'm not sure Missouri's a really great team. Kansas State's actually favored on the road, but this is still one of the better matchups. This is on the SEC network. So those are kind of your 3 top watches on the noon slate. I have 1 game in the channel flip category, and that is Iowa State at Ohio, which is on ESPNU. Now, Ohio still doesn't look very good. Chris Rourke is back at quarterback for Ohio last week as they slipped by Florida Atlantic. He had a couple of interceptions, did not look sharp. Possible that he's still banged up. And Iowa State lost to Iowa, of course. Chris Rourke is still probably the best quarterback in the game. Not a lot of super highlights from either squad right now, but this may be an opportunity for a MAC school to upset a Big 12 school at their home place. So you could get a field rushing in the MAC here. That would just really be something. That's the noon ESPNU game. Other notables in that window, Florida State will be playing at Boston College in ACC play. That's on ABC. They are going to smash Boston College, who's struggling there at the new coaching staff. Louisville at Indiana is a matchup of two Power 5 teams from different conferences. Borderline channel flippable, just because of the quality of the schedule here. It's pretty weak. But Louisville will be looking to move to 3-0 on the Big Ten network there. And we have Wisconsin hosting Georgia Southern on the Big Ten network. Georgia Southern, of course, upsetting Nebraska last year. Have a solid football program there. Wisconsin just trying to get something going on the offensive side with either Tanner Mordecai. The rushing offense was pretty pathetic last week, too. Just trying to get something there with the Badgers. Baylor's 0-2. They're hosting Long Island. That's on the Big 12 network and ESPN+. Boise State's also 0-2. They're hosting North Dakota State on FS1, trying to grab their first win of the season. North Dakota's 2-0. Wouldn't be expecting that necessarily when you see those records pop up. Wake Forest does have to go play at Old Dominion. Dominion 1-1. Wake Forest 2-0. Still favorites on the road there. That's on ESPN+. The Monarchs might have a real quarterback there in Grant Wilson. He was all right in the Virginia Tech loss and good last week against Louisiana Monroe. Or just Louisiana, sorry. The Raging Cajuns. But he might pose as a real challenge to Wake Forest. Moving on to the afternoon slate, we've got 20-ish games by my quick count. 10 top 25 teams will be playing. And this is a rough go. My top slot went to North Carolina hosting Minnesota. The Tar Heels are currently ranked 20th. Both of these teams are undefeated right now. Tar Heels are a little over a touchdown favorite right now. Not a whole lot going on with the Minnesota Gophers. Expected to face some challenges with some reset rosters this year, but they did beat Nebraska in a disgusting game in their opener, 13-10. Beat Eastern Michigan 25-6 last week. The starting quarterback there is going to be the death of them. Athen something, the Greek arm, I believe is his nickname, something like that. 1 passing touchdown, 2 picks, 57% completion percentage, 15 yards on the ground, and a rushing touchdown. That is just not where they're going to win football games. They have a good true freshman running back in Darius Taylor. He splits carries with Sean Taylor, the senior who's returned, but they're not super threatening on the ground either. The defense has a couple all right guys, but this is just not a threatening ball club at all. On the other side, you have Drake May, who has 2 touchdowns and 2 picks so far on the year. They did manage to put away Appalachian State last week, of course, and beat South Carolina. So that's actually 2 decent wins on the schedule for them so far. Better competition certainly than Minnesota, but struggling from what's expected to be one of the top picks in this upcoming draft. They have a real running back. They have at least a better defensive front. A running back's name is Omarion Hampton. He has 5 touchdowns already on the year, averaging 6.5 per carry. And British Brooks, the reserve, is averaging 6.9 yards per carry. So real guys to run the ball there. And they're going to be clear favorites to win the football game here. And that's the only top watch I have here. I have several channel flippers, which could turn into blowouts in a number of different ways here. CBS will be hosting Georgia. Well, Georgia will be hosting South Carolina on CBS, I guess is a better way to say it. And they're not expected to be pleasant hosts, almost 4 touchdown favorites. Georgia's pressure rate isn't great this year. They're not getting sacks. They're struggling a little bit in that perspective. Of course, they're still bringing along Carson Beck, so they're certainly not the elite powerhouse that we've seen the last couple years. But South Carolina is already kind of falling to pieces. Offensive line isn't looking great, and Spencer Rattler, it's Spencer Rattler or bust for the most part. So this could be just an absolute bloodbath. They're giving up points to Furman last week, and just lots of pressure against Furman. So Georgia may have an opportunity to really push those stats back up. That's the CBS game. Oregon State is ranked 16th. They're hosting San Diego State on FS1, also at 3:30. Oregon State's an even bigger favorite over San Diego State than the difference in South Carolina and Georgia. They've been putting up all kinds of points. The offense looks good. DJ Ungalele's putting It's completing 73% of his passes. No turnovers so far, passing at least. I don't think he's had any fumbles either. The run game's doing damage. The defense looks good. They haven't played super great competition, but they're a good football team. And San Diego State, again, has a barf offense. So let's see. Over-under's 49 points, and they're favored by almost 25. So that's indicative of what they think the Aztecs are going to be able to do against the Beavers. Next up, Duke. The Blue Devils, ranked 21st, 2-0, hosting Northwestern on the ACC network. Northwestern, a solid 1-1 right now, and really just not a good football team. But the fact of the matter is, Duke is playing another Power 5 opponent. They can move to 3-0. Their offense hasn't looked great in either of their games so far, so this will be an opportunity for them to put up some numbers, do some damage against I guess a quality opponent, if you dare say that. Ohio State will be hosting Western Kentucky. Western Kentucky can be a sneaky team sometimes. I'm not saying that they'll beat Ohio State by any stretch of the imagination. They do have a quarterback back there in Austin Reed, who led the nation in passing last season. He's got 589 yards, 67% completion, 6 touchdowns so far this year. They did beat South Florida 41-24 and put up 52 points on Houston Christian. I certainly don't expect them to beat Ohio State, but it is a team that can keep pace for at least a half until Ohio State kind of kicks into gear a little bit. Plus, we'll get to see Kyle McCord, who's officially named the starting quarterback. Maybe he'll get some things going with the offense. They'll be able to move the ball on the Hilltoppers a little bit there. I still remember the Hilltoppers hanging with LSU back in the 2000s for a bit. They've hung with just a number of other teams over the years. They're a surprising squad there. Tulsa will be hosting Oklahoma, who's ranked 19th on ESPN2. That's at 3:30. Get to see some more damage by Oklahoma there inflicted upon the Tulsians there. They were a little slow out the gate against SMU last week, but eventually put them down. And we'll see some more Jackson Arnold, who could eventually make a real push for the starting quarterback position. And he's got a little wiggle to him too, a little passing, a little throwing. It'll be exciting to see when and if that eventually happens. Iowa's hosting Western Michigan. Again, they've got to hit that 25 point per game point total in order to keep the offensive coordinator his job there. And they're not scoring 25 points per game right now. That is on the Big Ten Network at 3:30. Iowa back in the rankings in the 25 spot. They're favored by 28.5 with the 42-point over-under. Cal is now 1-1. They're hosting Idaho at 4 o'clock. That does not have a network yet. I assume the Pac-12 network will be stealing that one away. They played a good game last week against Auburn and came up just short. Southern Miss will be hosting Tulane at 4 o'clock on ESPNU. Not sure if Michael Pratt will be back for that one for the Mean Green Wave. Oh, I think I forgot Texas A&M. How could we forget the Aggies, who have been suffering from poor coaching here? They're 1-1 now. They're hosting Louisiana Monroe, 4 o'clock, SEC Network. They're heavily favored there over the Warhawks, but you never know. Could be sneaky there. Could be a sneaky game. Not expecting an upset, of course. But again, Texas A&M punching way below their weight there. Monroe's 2-0. No standout statistics say that they'll actually hang in this game or anything like that. They're almost 40-point underdogs. But Texas A&M will have to right the ship after the horrible loss last week to Miami. So moving to the evening slate. Big again, 34-ish games. 8 of the top 25 teams currently ranked are playing. Top watches, again, scraping the barrel a little bit here. Florida is hosting Tennessee, who's ranked 11th. This is on the ESPN main network at 7 o'clock. Florida Gators trying to recover after the whooping by Utah, who's in a little bit of disarray there at the quarterback position. They beat up McNeese last week, 49-7. Over 300 yards on the ground. Montrell Johnson Jr., 15 carries for 119 and 2 touchdowns. Trevor Etienne, 11 carries for 84 and a touchdown. And Webb had 14 carries for 72 and 2 touchdowns. That's exactly the place they want to be. Still not positive that the defense is going to be super dominant. That was supposed to be at least the front, possibly an area of strength. However, going to the Swamp for Tennessee could be dangerous. They're winning by running the ball as well right now, and they were sluggish getting off initially last week against Austin Peay. They eventually won 30-13, but you never know what may happen in the Gator Swamp. And I've always been a fan of Billy Napier, even though the past 2 seasons have been, or season and 2 games so far have been a little baffling. But Tennessee is not exactly throwing the ball over the yard like they were last year. Joe Milton isn't exactly lighting it up all over the place. He's 66% completion, 4 touchdowns, no picks, but he's not quite doing exactly what Hendon Hooker was very efficient at. They do have a lot of sacks, 11. They have a lot of tackles for losses. I believe they're up there. I believe they lead the country in sacks, and they're up there as far as tackle for losses as well. But again, the competition. But again, they've beaten Austin Peay and Virginia, who might be in the running for worst Power 5 school in the country this year. And Florida might be a little sneaky watch and have an opportunity to beat Tennessee in the evening slate. Michigan State is hosting Washington, who's ranked 8th, both undefeated. This will be on the Peacock Network at 5 o'clock, the stupid Peacock Network. Yet another network you have to keep track of, along with the Pac-12 and the Longhorns Network and ESPN+. However, the Spartans, with an intern coach with the Mel Tucker investigation and litigation and everything ongoing there, over 2 touchdown underdogs, going on the road, flying across the country to a loaded Mike Penix offense there. Michigan State seems to be finding some gears here. Noah Kim is completing almost 68% of his passes. No turnovers yet, 5 touchdowns, not getting hit. Only a couple sacks given up on the year. The running game's going a little bit behind Nathan Carter, who's averaging over 6 yards per carry. The defense has 10 sacks, which is up there as far as total sacks for any team on the year. So they're able to get some things going. But again, they've played Central Michigan and Richmond. And now they're hosting Washington. So the Huskies are flying across the country. So that tells you that line probably would have been a healthy 3 touchdowns. So it's going to be difficult. It will be rocking in East Lansing, certainly. But they'll have to stop one of the best offenses, passing offenses, certainly, in the country. But those are the 2 top watches I have in the evening slate. Michigan State hosting Washington, Florida hosting Tennessee. Channel flip games, I have Oklahoma State hosting South Alabama at 7 o'clock on the Big 12 and ESPN networks. They're only touchdown favorites right now, but that makes sense. South Alabama has been a very feisty ball club since they moved up to the top division in college football here. They struggled against Tulane a couple weeks back, but beat Southeast Louisiana last week. Not a whole lot of stats to say that there will definitely be an upset or anything like that. Oklahoma State's beat Central Arkansas and Arizona State, but they have not looked like a real dominant ball club and just have a powerful non-Power 5 team coming to town. They've been juggling a number of different quarterbacks there. I'll admit I haven't watched a whole lot of Oklahoma State there. I'm not actually sure who's the scheduled starter as they get into more difficult play here. But keep an eye on South Alabama playing at Oklahoma State. We also have the Troy Trojans, who were beaten down by Kansas State last week. They'll be hosting James Madison. This is a conference game. James Madison did overcome Virginia last week, and this will be playing on the NFL Network. That's the 7 o'clock NFL Network game. And the last 3 I have here aren't particularly appetizing, but we have number 17 Ole Miss hosting Georgia Tech on the SEC Network at 7:30. Ole Miss heavy favorites. Judkins, the running back, will be looking to get his wheels back under him to get that ground game going. Jackson Dart looking like one of the better quarterbacks in the SEC. That defense hopefully coming together there, as again, a lot of offenses in the SEC struggling. Georgia Tech going through its own rebuilding process there. Arkansas will be hosting BYU at 7:30 on ESPN2. Both of these teams are currently undefeated, but have not looked very good. Again, Arkansas struggling against one of the worst teams in the country, Kent State last week. They managed to pull it out. They also beat Sam Houston State 14-0. I'm sorry, that was BYU. Neither of these teams have looked very good, is the point. But Arkansas being an 8-point favorite at home against BYU, who's now in the Big 12. That is on ESPN2. Houston will be hosting TCU. A Big 12 battle here. This is the 8 o'clock game on Fox. Neither team has looked super impressive so far. Houston's beat UTSA just barely and then lost to Rice last week. While TCU, of course, lost to Colorado but beat Nicholas State. And one of these teams will be 1-2 coming out of this game. That is your channel flip games. Other notables include number 23 Washington State hosting Northern Colorado at 5 o'clock on the Pac-12 network. If you happen to get that, see if the Cougars can move to a whopping 3-0 in the powerful Pac-12 conference. UCLA will be hosting North Carolina Central. Get an opportunity to continue to watch true freshman Dante Moore flip the ball all over the place. That does not currently have a network listed. UCLA now 24th. Of course, that's also a Pac-12 team. Central Florida's 2-0. They're hosting Villanova. 6:30, Big 12 network, ESPN Plus network. The Knights, of course, looking to move to 3-0 and be a surprise team in the Big 12. And finally, Auburn's now 2-0. They're hosting Samford at 7 o'clock on the ESPN Plus network and the SEC Plus network. Quarterback is a little fuzzy there. Not looking so hot there is MSU transfer Peyton Thorne. But Hugh Freeze is trying to certainly rebuild the program there, and they look pretty good year one so far. We do have Cincinnati hosting Miami of Ohio, 7 o'clock ESPN Plus, Big 12 network as well. The Bearcats looking to move to 3-0, and they're in the Big 12 conference as well now. Texas Tech playing Tarleton State, Big 12, ESPN Plus, 7 o'clock. Just looking for their first win of the year. Supposed to be competitive in the Big 12. Just a tough schedule to open up. Michigan will be hosting Bowling Green on the Big 10 network. Heavy favorites there, of course. Kentucky has been struggling a bit out of the gate. They'll be hosting Akron at 7:30 on ESPNU. Hopefully they start to get their offense together a little bit. Still looking pretty sluggish. Purdue is hosting Syracuse at 7:30 on NBC. Finally got a win there for the Boilermakers. They are 1-1. Syracuse will certainly like a win. They have an opportunity possibly to move up to 4-0 before they play Clemson. And they had a great start last year, of course, winning 5 or 6 games, 5-0, I believe it was, before playing Clemson and narrowly losing last year. So they have an opportunity to roll up some wins early here. West Virginia will be hosting Pittsburgh at 7:30 on ABC. This is a coin flip game here. West Virginia starting to look halfway decent, trying to save their coach's job there. And Pittsburgh really struggling at the quarterback position. Defense isn't quite as dominant, so having some struggles there. Texas will be hosting Wyoming. Don't expect downfall after the big win last week, but still, Wyoming's a feisty team. This will be at 8 o'clock on the Longhorn Network. The 8 o'clock Pac-12 network game will be number 13 Oregon hosting Hawaii. There'll be heavy favorites there. And Clemson will be hosting Florida Atlantic. Again, Clemson not ranked. This will be the ACC network at 8 o'clock as they try to get it together there as well when their whopping second game in a row. I think it's also worth noting that ESPN Plus will have a quartet of interesting teams playing. Not that the competition is necessarily going to be there, but UAB will be hosting Louisiana. They're favored by 2.5 at the moment. You got to remember, you got a new coach there in Trent Dilfer. Almost flipped his name there. Denton, Trent, too many names. Trent Dilfer. of course, the host of the Elite 12 quarterback camp, analyst on different programs. He's now the head coach over there. They're sitting at 1-1 currently. They lost to Georgia Southern last week. It's a feisty program there. They beat North Carolina A&T in their debut, his head coaching debut there for the Blazers. So they're sitting at 1-1. Jacob Zeno, their quarterback's got 676 yards passing, 5 touchdowns, 1 pick, 84% completion rating. The defense seems to be maybe an all right group there. I guess I'm not too certain about that, to be sure. But they're hosting Louisiana. SMU, of course, in the Big 12 now, they'll be hosting Prairie View A&M. That's also on ESPN Plus as they try to rebound from the Oklahoma defeat. Rice with JT Daniels figures to be a feisty program just because they have a decent quarterback back there, at least for Conference USA level. They'll be hosting Texas Southern, 7 o'clock ESPN Plus, and then also Coastal Carolina, good quarterback, and Grayson McCall. They'll be hosting Duquesne as well. So UAB, SMU, Rice, and Coastal Carolina all regulated to the 7 o'clock time slot and streaming on ESPN Plus. But 4 teams, I almost channel flip up just to see what's going on with those squads. Finally, let's tackle your late night window. 4 games, 4 Power 5 programs, a very interesting slate here. So first of all, ESPN at 10 o'clock is going to be drooling with Colorado with an 18 number next to their name hosting Colorado State. You have a rivalry game. You have a game where they're expected to put up a lot of points. Again, not competitive, just their first opportunity to put like a 50-plus burger on the board. And they're going to be just drooling. Football fans, Twitter afterwards, drooling, as they're going to have an opportunity to roll up a ton of points. 59-point over-under with 23-point spread. Colorado State was not very good last year. They're 0-1 so far this season, only played 1 game. Coaching staff switched around there, expected to be a more competitive team. They lost 59-24 to Washington State so far this season, so just not a lot of data points to go off of there. Probably have a pretty good quarterback there in Brandon Fowler Nikowski, at least a competent quarterback, and just a lot of program rebuilding going on there. But that's going to be a fun one where Colorado will have an opportunity to show off more of its prowess and offensive skill players. FS1 at 10:30, we'll have Arizona State hosting Fresno State. Sun Devils don't look so good so far to start the season. Fresno's actually favored to go in there and win so far. The Bulldogs did beat Purdue on the road already, then played a close game against Eastern Washington, which is actually a pretty good football program. Mikey Keene played at, I think, Central Florida previously, 65% completion percentage, looking okay at quarterback, and he's going to be relied to really carry the weight there for the team for the most part. Kansas will be the other 10:30 game on the CBS Sports Network. They'll be playing Nevada, who is winless so far in the season, while Kansas hopes to move to 3-0. Heavy favorites there in Reno. Again, the defense looks like they may have something going, and if they can, the offense can certainly back that up. That could be very interesting just to see Kansas put some points on the board as well. And finally, 11 o'clock, the Pac-12 network will have Arizona, Jaden DeLora hosting UTEP, the Miners. A little bit was expected from that team this year to do some damage. UTEP's quarterback was getting some buzz as being at least an up-and-coming program, but they've had some struggles. Garvin Hardson, the quarterback there, 65% completion, just under 500 yards, 4 touchdowns, 4 picks. Some questionable play calling from the games that I've watched, certainly. Miners have not looked so awesome. And Arizona's favored by about 18 right now in this game. They'll have an opportunity to put points on the board as well. But Kansas and Colorado, man, the way Kansas destroyed Illinois last week was really, really something else. And Colorado in that late night window, of course, be a very fun game to watch. All right, your top watch categories. Your must-watch game, I penciled in Mississippi State hosting LSU on the noon slate on ESPN, but you could certainly argue something else. I'm not sure what it would be exactly. Florida and Tennessee would probably be your next highest candidate. I'm interested to see if Mississippi State possibly switches up the game plan a little bit to beat LSU. Otherwise, Florida and Tennessee would be next on that slate. Audible. I half jokingly penciled this in, but Oregon hosting Hawaii. Oregon's a very good football team. Bo Nix is a very good quarterback. They're going to put up a lot of points and win this game. I kind of like Hawaii's quarterback, Brendan Shager. I still can't say that name. He looks, again, at least somewhat competent. Hawaii looks like one of the better programs they've had in a while, and they'll be 1-3 after the day. But there's just not a lot going on, and that's a game that I would flip to in the evening slate if Tennessee wrangles the Gators and Ole Miss beats up Georgia Tech and Washington is blowing out Michigan State. That's a game I'd flip to see what's going on. Check-in game. Check in on Ohio State playing Western Kentucky. Again, Hilltoppers can be dangerous. Ohio State's been sluggish. They've officially named their starting quarterback. Maybe they'll finally get the receivers fired up. No upset in the works here, but could be an interesting game for at least a half. That is the 4 o'clock Fox game. Small screen Starlet. James Madison at Troy. Again, a conference game. James Madison made at least news for those that watch all of college football. Last season, when it moved up to the highest division here, won a whole bunch of games, looked pretty good, tailed off towards the back end of the season, and wasn't eligible for a bowl game. I believe they are this year. I believe they're off that ridiculous probation that prevents them from going bowling. Rather watch them than about a third of the schools that did. And they'll get to challenge a decent Troy team, even though the Trojans got smoked last week. And this is on the NFL Network, the 7 o'clock game. Underrated, Ohio hosting Iowa State. A MAC team would have a shot at a Big 12 team. Chris Rourke, again, doesn't get to play a lot of great competition at quarterback there. I think he's still hurt and banged up. I don't remember if it was a hand injury or leg, or I don't remember exactly what was going on with him at this point. But that's Iowa State at Ohio, moving up to the small school, and that is a afternoon game, 3:30, I believe. No, it's a noon on ESPNU. And finally, your late night snack. I think they all have a little intrigue to them, although they have clear favorites, but it's going to be Colorado on ESPN, of course. With all the announcers drooling, you'll hear announcements for it and commercials all through the day. Don't forget the late night with Colorado, and that's 10 o'clock on ESPN. So that is your slate. Thanks again for tuning in. Thanks again for hanging with my raspy voice. Appreciate it. I'll talk to you later. Bye.